People wander through life as if they're invisible, brushing past moments, faces, connections, never noticing the ones who matter, the ones who anchor them to something real. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe nudges you, whispers through chaos, insists that you pause, that you hold on, that you don't let go of the person who sees the cracks you hide, who carries your chaos alongside theirs, who refuses to walk away when everything else screams escape. Most people don't listen. They let convenience, pride, distraction, or fear sweep the important ones out of their lives, oblivious to the fact that some connections are rare, fragile, unrepeatable, and when the universe presses, insists, demands, this is the one you cannot release, it isn't asking politely. It's shaking your chest, rattling your mind, testing whether you're aware enough, brave enough, desperate enough to recognize the value of holding on when everyone else would walk away. Some people enter your life like a storm you didn't expect, tearing through the monotony, rattling your world, leaving traces of chaos and clarity in equal measure. And if you're paying attention, if you can stop pretending that life is neat, predictable, and under control, you notice that they carry pieces of you that you didn't even know were missing. They reflect your cracks, your hidden fears, your unspoken desires, and somehow, impossibly, they hold the broken fragments together when everything else around you threatens to collapse. Most people walk through life blind, deaf to the signals, oblivious to the significance of the ones who matter, and so they let these rare, fragile connections slip through their fingers without realizing the gravity of what they're losing. It's easy to ignore someone when convenience, distraction, or ego tells you it doesn't matter. It's easy to turn away when pride whispers that you can manage alone. But the universe, in its cruel and precise way, doesn't make these connections obvious. It hides them in plain sight, leaving breadcrumbs in moments of laughter, in shared silence, in tension that feels electric, in understanding that no one else seems capable of offering. And only those who notice, who lean into the discomfort, who recognize the weight of presence, understand what is at stake. Holding on to a person like this requires more than casual attention. It demands awareness, vigilance, and courage. Because the truth is brutal, the people who carry parts of your soul, the ones who see you fully and remain, are rare. The ones who anchor you in chaos, who understand the unspoken rules of your mind, who navigate the darkness alongside you, do not come often, and they do not wait. They exist in a delicate balance, simultaneously grounding and challenging you, holding you accountable while tolerating your flaws, reflecting your chaos back to you in a way that forces recognition, understanding, growth, and discomfort. Most people flee from this. They call it exhausting, overwhelming, inconvenient. They mistake intensity for threat, presence for suffocation, understanding for intrusion, and in doing so, they let the rarest connections vanish before they ever had a chance to flourish. And isn't that deliciously ironic, that the ones most capable of saving you from yourself, of holding the pieces of your fractured existence together, are the ones people often dismiss, abandon, or fail to recognize? They see your cracks and don't run. They watch your chaos and stay. They hold the unspeak able parts of you without judgment, without expectation, without apology, and yet people turn away, blind to the gravity of their presence. It's almost a test, a twisted, unrelenting examination of awareness and courage, because the universe doesn't shout its instructions. It doesn't announce the importance of this person in neon lights or headlines. It whispers, it nudges, it shakes, and if you are too distracted, too arrogant, too self-absorbed to notice, the opportunity passes, leaving only regret, emptiness, and the hollow echo of what could have been. Holding on to someone who carries pieces of you is not passive. It is active, demanding, messy, uncomfortable, and at times terrifying. You have to acknowledge their value without letting pride interfere. You have to tolerate the friction that comes from being mirrored, challenged, confronted with your own chaos. You have to risk vulnerability, admit dependence without shame, and resist the urge to flee when intimacy feels dangerous. Most people fail at this because it is easier to abandon, to run, to prioritize convenience over significance, to chase illusions of control, rather than engage with the complexity of human connection. And yet, those who hold on, who recognize the subtle nudges, who lean into the presence of the rare, chaotic, grounding person in their lives, discover a power and clarity that is terrifying in its intimacy, intoxicating in its honesty, and unreplicable once lost. The universe doesn't intervene in vain. The ones who appear, the ones who shake your world, who carry the weight of pieces of yourself you cannot bear to face alone, are not coincidences. They are deliberate, precise, unavoidable. And the challenge is as much about noticing them as it is about holding on. Awareness is not easy. Courage is not convenient. Recognition comes wrapped in discomfort, in frustration, in tension, in moments that demand attention, patience, and honesty. And most people fail because they want simplicity, safety, and control, while what is offered is complexity, chaos, responsibility, and connection. And yet the reward for those who rise to the challenge is immeasurable, irreplaceable, and life-altering in ways the unobservant could never understand. Connections that matter rarely arrive quietly. They storm into life with the force of a truth you didn't know you were avoiding, shaking the foundatio. And you've built with ego, habit, and distraction. Most people are blind to it. They see faces, but not presence. They hear words, but not meaning. They skim moments, but they never notice the gravity hidden beneath the surface. And yet, some people enter your world and instantly, irreversibly, pull at the pieces of your mind and soul that you've been hiding even from yourself. They don't wait politely for you to notice. They don't ask permission. They strike, subtle or violent, chaotic or calm, but always impossible to ignore if you are awake. And that's the danger and the gift of connections that matter. They demand attention, demand recognition, demand honesty, and most people are too distracted, too arrogant, too shallow to provide it. Imagine someone showing up in your life not as entertainment, not as a convenience, not as a disposable accessory to pass the time, but as a mirror to your chaos, a reflection of your cracks, a repository for your hidden truths. They see what others gloss over. They hear the words you don't say. They notice the tremors in your chest, the hesitation in your voice, the tiny betrayals of your ego and fear. Most people would turn away. Most people woo. LD shrink, flee, pretend they never noticed. But some people insist. They refuse to vanish in the comfort of your distraction. They linger, press, wait, until you are forced to confront the truth of their significance, the reality that some presences in your life are not optional, and that ignoring them has consequences far more profound than you imagined. And isn't that ironic? That the moments most people dismiss as inconvenient, irritating, or uncomfortable are often the ones that hold the key to survival, growth, clarity, and self-understanding? Connections that matter are rarely wrapped in ease or comfort. They appear as friction, tension, challenge. They demand patience, courage, and attention, and they punish distraction, arrogance, and denial with subtle precision. You might ignore a dozen smaller nudges, 100 distractions, 1,000 superficial relationships, but the rare connection that truly matters refuses to be ignored. It lingers in the chaos, it echoes in memory, it haunts your awareness, and it waits, sometimes for years, until you finally notice that someone's presence is not a coincidence, but a deliberate intervention, a test, a mirror, a tether to sanity, or destruction depending on what you choose to do with it. Holding on to someone who matters is far more complex than people are willing to admit. It is not convenience. It is not comfort. It is not a reward for being good, clever, or charming. It is a challenge wrapped in intimacy, responsibility, and tension. You have to navigate the friction, survive the exposure, confront your ego, and endure the vulnerability that comes from allowing someone to see the unpolished, jagged, chaotic parts of you that the world encourages you to hide. Most people fail at this because it's easier to flee, easier to avoid, easier to sacrifice significance for comfort. They don't recognize the pattern until it is gone, and then the absence screams louder than any presence ever could, and regret becomes the cruel echo of what they refused to hold on to when it mattered most. And the universe does not intervene politely. It nudges, shakes, disrupts, and if ignored, escalates. Connections that matter are rarely convenient, and the consequences of ignoring them are rarely subtle. They may not vanish immediately, but the moment will come when the absence becomes undeniable, when the gap is too wide, when the loss cannot be repaired, and the lesson arrives in full force. Those who matter, those who carry pieces of your soul, those who anchor you in chaos, do not wait forever. They do not forgive blindness indefinitely. And the irony, the dark, brutal irony, is that most people waste decades chasing superficial approval, chasing the meaningless while the rare vital connections slip through their fingers unnoticed, invisible, unappreciated, until all that remains is the haunting sense of a presence that could have changed everything, that could have grounded them, healed them, saved them, if only they had noticed when they had the chance. Connections that matter demand recognition. They demand awareness. They demand courage, patience, and honesty. They exist to pull you awake, to confront the chaos, to reveal the truth you've been hiding from yourself, to force acknowledgement of value that cannot be replicated or replaced. Most people ignore them because they are inconvenient, uncomfortable, unpredictable. They resist the weight of significance because they crave simplicity, control, and distraction. And yet those who recognize them, who lean into the tension, who embrace the presence, rather than flee, discover the rarest, most potent form of clarity, power, and survival hidden within human chaos. Something no distraction, no comfort, no convenience can ever replicate. Letting go of the right person is easier than holding on, but far more costly. People convince themselves it's simpler, that the weight of responsibility, emotion, or awareness is too much to carry. They rationalize distance, rationalize separation, rationalize indifference, and they pat themselves on the back for doing what's best, as if ease ever equated to wisdom. The universe does not reward ignorance. It does not care about convenience or comfort. Letting go of someone who matters is a subtle act of self-destruction disguised as freedom. Most people fail to see it because the loss isn't immediate. It creeps quietly, infiltrates thought, erodes clarity, and eventually, like a virus, spreads through every decision, every relationship, every fragment of the mind that once depended on the stability of the connection they abandoned. The price is high. The cost is invisible until it becomes unavoidable. People wander through life blind to it, praising themselves for lightening the load while slowly hollowing themselves from the inside, leaving only emptiness where presence once anchored them, leaving only regret where recognition could have guided them. Holding on is harder because it demands attention, patience, and courage. It requires you to see clearly, not just the surface, but the cracks, the chaos, the flaws, the unpredictability that come with real presence. It forces you to confront discomfort without fleeing, to embrace tension without denying its weight, to persist when everything in the world whispers to let go. And yet, that persistence, that deliberate choice to stay, is what preserves sanity, clarity, and continuity in the chaotic mess of human existence. Most people are too cowardly, too impatient, too fragile to endure it. They seek the illusion of control and release, thinking that the absence of challenge is safety. But safety without significance is emptiness, and emptiness accumulates until it gnaws at the edges of consciousness, until it reveals itself in missed opportunity, broken relationships, and the quiet scream of what if, echoing endlessly in the mind of the one who abandoned the connection that truly mattered. People underestimate the subtle intelligence behind the insistence to hold on. The universe rarely shouts. It rarely makes grand declarations. It nudges, shakes, disturbs, and the rare person who enters your life with gravity, intensity, and chaos embedded in their presence is often a test, a warning, a mirror, a tether. To ignore them is to reject guidance. To abandon them is to sever a line to clarity, to survival, to something that cannot be replaced. But people do it anyway because convenience feels safer than confrontation, because ignorance feels easier than courage, because the mind cannot tolerate the weight of accountability that comes with recognizing a presence that matters more than comfort, more than pride, more than routine. The irony is delicious. Those who are capable of holding the weight of significance, of anchoring the chaos, of reflecting truths you refuse to see, often become invisible to those too blind or too afraid to notice. They linger in plain sight, offering subtle cues, offering quiet patience, offering presence that demands recognition, and yet people ignore rationalize it away, dismiss it as coincidence, mistake it for burden, and in doing so, they allow a lifeline to drift past their grasp, allowing a rare, irreplaceable connection to dissolve into absence, leaving only the residue of longing, regret, and awareness too late to act. Holding on requires honesty. It requires confrontation with ego, with fear, with desire, with fragility. It requires endurance of tension without fleeing, acceptance of chaos without avoidance, and acknowledgement of the value that cannot be replaced, the presence that cannot be substituted, the connection that carries pieces of the soul you cannot afford to lose. Most people fail because they want ease over truth, comfort over challenge, illusion over awareness. They turn away from the friction, ignore the warning, flee the responsibility, and in doing so they unravel threads that would have anchored them to clarity, stability, and growth. And the brilliance of it lies in the rarity. The moments when someone appears with gravity, depth, and insistence are moments you cannot manufacture. They are deliberate, precise, and impossible to replicate once lost. They demand recognition, respect, persistence, and courage. They expose every weakness, reveal every flaw, illuminate every truth, and yet most people cannot tolerate the weight of it. They let go, they walk away, they abandon what matters most, and only much later, when absence has hollowed the space, when reflection hits with brutal clarity, when regret gnaws at every corner of the mind, do they realize the magnitude of the cost, the precision of the loss, and the inescapable truth that letting go was not freedom, but surrender to emptiness, and holding on was the path to preservation, to clarity, and to survival in the chaos of life. The universe sometimes nudges you towards someone who anchors your chaos, and people rarely notice. Most wander through life with blinders strapped tight, convinced that movement, noise, and distraction are the proof of living, that connection is incidental, optional, disposable. But then someone appears who doesn't allow you to forget the pieces of yourself you have spent decades hiding, someone who refuses to disappear, even when the rest of the world encourages you to flee. Someone who insists, subtly or violently, that you acknowledge presence, accountability, and significance, and suddenly the chaos you were comfortable with becomes unbearable. It is a cruel trick, isn't it, that the very presence which could save you from unraveling also demands attention, introspection, and courage that you have long avoided. People resist, they rage, they flee, they rationalize, they call it inconvenience, intrusion, or burden, and yet the universe keeps nudging, pressing, shaking, until recognition is inevitable, until the tethered chaos insists on being noticed, until the gravity of significance pierces the veil of ignorance. Those who anchor your chaos are not simple. They do not fit into the neat, convenient categories you have constructed to manage your life. They are wild, unpredictable, demanding, frustrating, intense, and at times terrifyingly honest. They see the cracks in your facade and do not run. They witness the chaos in your mind and do not flinch. They understand the darkness in your heart and do not recoil. Most people flee from such presence because it forces reflection, confrontation, and endurance. Most people are not prepared for the magnitude of recognition that comes with someone who refuses to leave. They want connections that are safe, convenient, predictable, and manageable. They are unprepared for someone who carries gravity, chaos, insight, and truth all at once. Someone who anchors them to reality with a weight they cannot escape and yet cannot ignore. The push to hold on to such a person is relentless because the stakes are higher than ordinary awareness. You are not being asked to notice a fleeting presence, a trivial companion, or a convenient ally. You are being confronted with someone who holds the fragments of your sanity, your understanding, your clarity, the hidden pieces you can never recover if abandoned. Most people mistake ease for safety, fleeing from challenge, fleeing from tension, fleeing from responsibility, while failing to realize that the rare person who anchors their chaos is precisely the one who ensures survival, continuity, and the preservation of what is irreplaceable within themselves. The irony is exquisite. The presence that is hardest to accept, that demands the most attention, that irritates, frustrates, challenges, and exposes, is the one that is most vital to preserve. People do not like being confronted with significance. They avoid it, rationalize it, deflect it, dismiss it as coincidence, misint, or print it as burden. And yet significance does not negotiate. Presence does not bow to ego, convenience, or comfort. It waits, persistent, precise, unavoidable. It nudges through moments of silence, friction, tension, and vulnerability, refusing to be ignored, refusing to allow evasion, refusing to permit the trivialization of something that carries life-altering weight. Most people fail to notice until absence strikes, until reflection lands with brutal clarity, until regret screams louder than presence ever could, and then the realization arrives, the chaos they ignored, the gravity they dismissed, the anchor they abandoned, was not optional, not replaceable, not trivial, and the consequences of ignoring it cannot be undone. Holding on to someone who anchors your chaos is a deliberate act of awareness. It is courage made manifest. It is recognition that the threads that tie you to sanity, stability, and significance are rare, fragile, and irreplaceable. It is acknowledgement that some connections demand attention, even when inconvenient, insight, even when painful, presence, even when frightening. And yet most people are too distracted by noise, comfort, and ego to engage with it. They flee the challenge, ignore the gravity, deny the significance, and convince themselves that simplicity and ease are preferable to endurance and attention, not realizing that the cost of neglect is far higher than the burden of engagement. The universe's nudges are precise because they are deliberate. They are not random. They are calibrated to awaken awareness, to test courage, to expose denial, to demand recognition of what is essential. And those who heed the nudges, who lean into tension rather than flee, who hold on rather than release, discover the rare, terrifying, intoxicating clarity of being anchored in chaos, the power of connection that cannot be replicated, the understanding that significance is not convenience, that presence is not optional, that the rare person who anchors your chaos is both a mirror and a tether, both a challenge and a lifeline. And the realization of that truth changes the perception of chaos, connection, and survival in ways that those too blind to notice will never understand. True bonds are tested in moments when letting go feels simpler, when convenience whispers seductively that release is easier than endurance, when fear masks itself as rationality and convinces the mind that walking away is the wiser, safer, and saner choice. Most people fail these moments because human nature craves ease, craves comfort, craves the illusion that nothing of consequence will be lost if they turn away. But the universe, in its cruel, precise way, does not allow such illusions to persist. True bonds arrive with friction, tension, exposure, and chaos baked into their existence. They demand attention, awareness, and courage. They test the limits of patience and self-understanding. They force recognition of value that cannot be replaced, of presence that cannot be substituted, of connection that cannot be ignored without consequence. And yet, in the face of such intensity, most people take the easy path. They flee, they rationalize, they convince themselves that letting go is protection when it is surrender, that absence is freedom when it is emptiness, that avoidance is wisdom when it is blindness. The test of a true bond is subtle but unrelenting. It comes in the form of tension in the air when proximity is unavoidable, in the silent pull of recognition that someone matters more than comfort, in the quiet reflection that shows you pieces of yourself you have been hiding even from yourself. The universe is patient, precise, and terrifyingly deliberate in its orchestration of these moments. It waits until distraction, ego, and fear can no longer cloud judgment, until the reflex tone in the rare person who anchors your chaos can no longer be ignored, until the choice between letting go and holding on becomes unavoidable. And when people finally notice, they realize the stakes were never arbitrary. The connection was always a test, the tension always a signal, the presence always deliberate. And the moments when letting go seemed easiest were exactly the ones that demanded recognition and courage. Holding on to someone who matters is never simple. It is messy, challenging, frustrating, exposing, and at times terrifying. It forces confrontation with the self in ways that avoidance cannot. It requires seeing clearly, not just the surface, but the depth, the cracks, the chaos, the flaws, the brilliance, the unpredictability of another human being who refuses to vanish even when the world encourages you to flee. Most people are unprepared for the intensity of this responsibility. They mistake friction for threat, tension for burden, reflection for intrusion, and in doing so, they let the rarest, most vital connections slip quietly out of their grasp. And the cost of such neglect is invisible at first, but accumulates relentlessly until absence becomes a wound that cannot be healed, until regret gnaws with a precision that mirrors the truth they refuse to face. There is irony in the resistance to holding on, the very presence that challenges, frustrates, and exposes is often the one that preserves sanity, clarity, and survival. The universe does not deliver significance politely. It does not wrap it in comfort or convenience. It delivers it raw, chaotic, unavoidable, and waits to see if attention, courage, and awareness are strong enough to endure it. Most people fail this test repeatedly. They flee from tension, rationalize away responsibility, avoid exposure, and prioritize the superficial over the substantial. And in doing so, they hollow themselves, leaving spaces in the mind and heart that can never be refilled, leaving fractures in perception that shape every future choice, leaving echoes of what could have been in every moment they convince themselves that simplicity is preferable to significance. Yet those who recognize true bonds and endure the test discover something intoxicating, terrifying, and life-altering. They learn to navigate friction, embrace tension, confront fear, and see clearly the value of presence, reflection, and connection. They understand that true bonds are rare, irreplaceable, and deliberate. They realize that moments when letting go feels simplest are precisely the moments that reveal courage, awareness, and insight, that demand recognition, responsibility, and honesty, that separate those who endure chaos and emerge intact from those who flee into emptiness. And in leaning into the discomfort, in holding on when everything whispers release, in acknowledging the gravity of a rare presence that anchors chaos and reflects truth, people begin to glimpse the profound intelligence, precision, and relentless intention that shape the patterns of connection, significance, and survival that define the trajectory of human life in ways that most who flee will never understand. Holding on requires awareness, courage, and a willingness to face discomfort that most people spend their lives avoiding. People like simplicity. They like the illusion that life can be neat, controllable, and predictable. They like to convince themselves that detachment is safety, that indifference is wisdom, that walking away from significance is the rational choice. But reality is cruel, precise, and unyielding. The reconnections that carry meaning, that anchor chaos, that reflect truth, do not operate on convenience. They press against the mind, stir the soul, and insist upon recognition. They confront pride, arrogance, distraction, and denial. And if ignored, they escalate, forcing awareness with a persistence that is often uncomfortable, frightening, and unavoidable. People resist because confrontation is exhausting. Responsibility is heavy, vulnerability is terrifying. And yet, those who lean into it, who embrace the tension, discover clarity, insight, and survival that cannot be replicated or substituted. The act of holding on is deceptively simple in description, but profoundly complex in practice. It demands attention to nuance, recognition of patterns, and acceptance of imperfection in yourself and in the other. It requires endurance through moments when patience is tested, when frustration peaks, when exposure of one's deepest flaws becomes inevitable. Most people flee at the first tremor of discomfort. They rationalize distance, justify avoidance, or blame circumstances rather than confront the gravity of presence. The universe, however, does not tolerate such blindness forever. It nudges, shakes, disrupts, insisting that recognition, acknowledgement, and engagement occur. The rare person who anchors your chaos is a living, breathing reminder that significance demands action, presence, and responsibility, and ignoring them is not a neutral act. It is surrender to emptiness, a subtle erosion of potential, and a risk that accumulates quietly until absence speaks louder than recognition ever could. The pressure to hold on is relentless because the stakes are high. Connections that matter are not replaceable. They are not incidental. They are not convenient. They hold pieces of your sanity, clarity, and understanding that cannot be replicated, substituted, or ignored. The friction, the exposure, the tension, the challenge, these are not obstacles but the markers of significance, signals from reality itself that what stands before you is rare, vital, and worth the endurance it demands. And yet most people are too distracted, too arrogant, too cowardly to sustain the engagement required. They chase illusion, they avoid tension, they prioritize comfort over consequence, and in doing so, they forfeit